Hello, everyone. I'm Dominique.
And I'm Christina, and we are the Connected in Glass podcast.
Every week, we will feature interviews with glass artists who speak to their creative processes and overcoming challenges.
These conversations are real and raw. We hope that by sharing these stories, you're able to find some connection and know that you're not alone.
We just wanted to take a moment to thank you for listening to our podcast. We're super passionate about this project and work for hours every week to bring you this content. So if you'd like to help support us, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/connectedinglass. Also, please consider joining our Facebook group, Connected in Glass Community, where we continue the conversations from these episodes. We'd love to hear from you.
This episode of Connected in Glass is sponsored by Diddy Clips. Diddy Clips has changed the way we film our glassblowing videos, and we're proud to be working with them.
Today, we're interviewing Andy Ray. He's a glass artist currently based in Eugene, Oregon, who's been working with glass since 2003.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right. We're so excited to get to know you. But at first, let's skip the glass part of your life right now. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you live, and what you enjoy besides glass.
I live in Eugene. I like people. I like people a lot. I like nature a lot. I enjoy gardening and dance and music. Really enjoy freedom of choice and freedom of expression as well. That's probably what led me to being self-employed. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I love people and dance and music and nature.
Okay, so tell us how you started with glass, like 20 years ago almost, huh?
It started even before that, really. In 1990, I moved to Tucson, and I went to an electronic trade school and was learning how to fix computers and TVs and radios and things like that. And I met Lucky, and Lucky and I were neighbors, and we were both in the same class, and we became good friends. We went to our first Grateful Dead show together. Before that, I met this gentleman, Dave Tolaire, and he was from Oregon, and he did these really cool ceramic pipes. And he taught me how, and he sold me a kiln for $60, and I bought $60 worth of clay, and I started psychedelic ceramics, and ended up teaching Lucky, and Lucky ended up going out and doing the ceramics on Dead Tour.
Oh, that's so cool.
And you fast forward to 2003. 13 years later, Lucky shows up in Tucson. I'd bumped into him in Colorado a couple times at Red Rocks, at different shows at Red Rocks, and he was selling his pipes. I'd also run into his pipes at head shops in Denver, and it was really hard to sell mine because his prices were incredibly low. And when he showed up at my house in 2003, he asked if he could blow glass in my backyard, and the Best Bead show was coming, and there was the Gem Show in Tucson, which is just an insane thing. And he wanted to come and blow glass during that time, and I said sure. And he set up on my back porch, and he was encouraging me to make these vortex pendants that he was making. He's like, come on, make them, make some Lucky vortexes. You'll love it. And so one day I did, and a few days later went to bed, and I had this idea about how maybe I could create multiple vortexes in a piece. And I woke up in the morning and tried my idea. And the design wasn't really multiple vortexes, but it was cool. And I'd been around, I'd seen a lot of glass because I'd gone to so many head shops. In fact, the catchphrase in my pipe career was, "These are beautiful. You gotta learn how to make them out of glass." And so I'd seen a lot of glass, and I'd never seen anything like what I made. And everyone said it looked galactic. And I said, okay. I had an insurance check that I'd been sitting on for about $8,000. And I didn't want to blow it on a vacation or something. I wanted to start a new job. So I went to the Best Best Bead Show, Lewis Wilson's show, and I met Mike and bought my glasses. I bought most of my tools from Craig Milliron from Arrow Springs, got most of my supplies and my torch from him, and bought some materials from Glasscraft back when it was the Colorado Glasscraft. And I started Galactic Glass. It happened to be that the day I woke up with the idea for the multiple vortex was also Operation Pipe Dream and Operation Headhunter that day. And so getting out of making pipes was something that seemed like it might be a good idea. So I went and started Galactic Glass and have been working with glass since then. The next year I met a distributor who really loved my work and was buying insane amounts of pendants from me. And it made it so that I needed to hire someone. My son was 15. I told him, you could, this summer I either want you to volunteer and get some work experience, get a job, or come work with me. He came to work with me at 15, started making all of my vortex pendants and marbles and such, and we worked together until just a few years ago, just before COVID, where he had earned his black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and him and his wife opened a gym a few hours away, and he went on his own path. And that's pretty much my glass story.
When you started, what was the glass industry like? Because it wasn't as expansive as it is today. And there also weren't as many resources to learn from, right? Did you learn from Lucky, or did he kind of like move on and then you had to like self-teach for a while?
So I learned the vortex from Lucky. And to this day, I still pretty much use the techniques he taught me when I do a vortex. Everything else was self-taught for a long time. I would have people into my studio, and I would hang out with people in their studio when I traveled. So definitely it was more that kind of sharing of ideas. There weren't so many people teaching classes. There wasn't Patreon and YouTube and all of that to learn from. I think Revere might have been doing his thing back then. I'm not sure, but I wasn't privy to that at the time. There was, it was the melting pot was a thing then. And Facebook wasn't. Instagram wasn't. TikTok and Patreon, like so much has changed because of that. And there were, the Lewis's show was something that really impacted my life a lot. I lived in Tucson, and he came through and did the Best Bead Show in Tucson. And I learned a lot just by doing his show and just by talking with other people and having a big enough studio that I could invite people over and having epic parties where people were blowing glass in the studio and just from being social. Just from having real life social experience as opposed to online social experience.
Can you tell us a little bit about how your work has grown and changed over the years, like different inspirations that have come in and out, and maybe like there's some things that you kind of still hold on to, right? Like you're still doing some things the same, but then other things, maybe they keep evolving.
I've kind of come back to doing mostly what I did in the beginning. So in the beginning, I was a bead lady. And I did bead shows and loved it. Did so many bead shows, and glass beads were in vogue. And they were fashionable at the time, and those shows were lucrative. Then moved to Eugene. My son and I started making pipes and Murini, and really got into the pipes again, doing that, and really got burnt out on it. Part of what inspires me is kindness, is common sense, common courtesy. Just people being nice to each other. And the pipe industry has changed so much. When I was selling to head shops making ceramic pipes, head shops were not on every street corner. You had to really kind of search for them, and they really cared that you did find them, and they're like, I'll buy these from you, but I want to make sure that you're going to be around to sell me more later. I don't want you just to be fly by night. Where now head shop owners have so many people throwing product at them that it feels like there's so many distributors, there's so many things that the people who are out there marketing their own work to them are facing a lot of challenge, a lot of struggle, unless they have a big name already, unless there's somebody who is being sought after. And so I've really kind of come back to just making marbles and pendants. And I throw a few of them on pipes, and I throw some into drinking vessels. But I enjoyed making the marbles and pendants, and I enjoyed selling outside of the head shop industry. And so I've been kind of working more towards that. And line tubing, I like doing that too. I got a lathe, and I really enjoy just the heat and the energy that goes into that.
And are you mostly working boro?
Pretty much exclusively boro. I took a Marini class with Lauren Stump, and that was soft glass, and I've done a little bit of furnace work here and there. For a little while I was on the board of directors at the Sonoran Glass Art Academy, and definitely had some fun playing in the hot shop there.
It must have been kind of scary at first with like Operation Pipe Dreams, and how that was kind of how you built your business in that industry a little bit. Can you talk about how that impacted you? You already said you kind of switched more to pendants, but in any other ways?
I wasn't too scared myself being such a small fish, but it was a wake-up call. I had attended Champs the year before. It was the last year they were at the Cashman Center, and they had hired an attorney who's represented people in the paraphernalia industry since 1972. And when he spoke about the laws, it really kind of sunk in that there's not many ways to really claim that what you're doing is legal on a federal level when you're making pipes. That the federal government has really, they don't lose cases for one, so they'll only take you to court if they're going to win. And their laws are measured, state is objective and federal is subjective, I believe, how laws are weighed in court, and that making pipes was illegal. And I was happy to step aside from that while things felt so hot. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Do you always feel so inspired by your work, or is there ever a time where you're just like, I don't want to do this right now?
I've been struggling with feeling inspired for quite a while. It's not the degenerate nature of the industry, but the degenerate behavior that, like the way some people behave online, the way how people really just kind of, like, I'm inspired by kindness. I'm inspired by people, and I definitely felt a little bit of a disconnect there. There was a period a few years ago. I went and did hospice care with my partner for her mom, and it was 2 months that we spent out of town taking care of her mom full time. And when I came back from that, I needed to do something different for a while. That was right when my son also got his black belt and moved on. And we had a crew of 5. During that 2 months, I ended up laying everybody off and went and drove for Lyft and Uber. I loved it. Honestly, it was as much fun as I've ever had making money. it was adventure time every night. I would go out on all these little mini adventures with people. Sometimes I got to be a superhero and like really make a difference in people's lives. And it was just before COVID that I did that for a little over a year, and then had an appendectomy a month before COVID became a lockdown thing. And then COVID came, and I take care of my mom. She's going to be 89 this year. I certainly don't want her to get sick. So I stopped driving and started getting back into the studio. And it's a struggle sometimes. There are definitely times where I go in there and I'm just forcing myself to work. And sometimes it shifts and I start having fun. I play music really loud and I dance and I sing and get goofy. And other times I force myself, and I'm forcing myself for a few hours and eventually give up and say, okay, I'll come back tomorrow. But my studio is in my home and I'm able to just hop into it anytime.
What was it like? Well, first of all, I'll acknowledge you're a people person. So maybe it's like kind of easy for you to have to manage all the personalities, but having a crew of people that are working for you that are like making your product, what was that part like for you?
It was exciting. It was fun. I definitely probably enjoyed that more than I enjoy trying to sell all the work that we were making. And it was fun. Like there were people that I hired that weren't friends when they started, but they were all friends and they were all family. And it was really hard to see my business crumble and to have to let them go. I know at least one of them was probably happy. Like he was sticking with it because he knew that I was kind of counting on him. And he stuck with it because he needed the income. But it was burning him out physically and emotionally to do that much production. And that was kind of hard to see as well. Like,
Were they making your designs, or was it kind of like a team effort to come up with the products that you thought were going to sell or that you wanted to make?
my son was inspired at one point to do toner tech. And toner tech is a process you do where you apply toner from paper that you printed on onto glass, and then you fume it, and the toner acts as a masking agent. And we were making toner tech pop culture stuff, Rick and Morty pipes. That really got us rolling. Rick and Morty was really popular at the time, and David was all like, let's do some Rick and Morty pipes. And, you know, I would say I'm an entrepreneur, and art is my medium, or glass is my medium. And when David said that, I wasn't super excited about doing it, but I also recognized that it would be lucrative. So we went with it. And it was really lucrative. It was something where within a few months I was asking people if they wanted to come and help. And it felt good being able to provide that opportunity. But like I said, it was a double-edged sword because on some level, production work is really tough to do in glass. It wears your body out. And it was hard to see that happening to somebody that I cared about. And to know that we were both kind of dependent on it continuing. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm trying to remember this quote, but I just want to say this for you because I'm trying to remind myself too that there's something about just because a business ended doesn't mean it wasn't successful. Like every success thing needs an end story. So like you were super successful, and just because it ended doesn't mean it was bad.
No, it was successful. It was successful.
Own it.
We
If you had 5 employees that you couldn't survive without them.
Yeah, there was one photo I took, or that was taken of the studio when we were all hanging out, and I added up the years of experience, and it was somewhere around 105 between all of us.
Okay, so when you come up with a new design idea, do you draw it out? And I guess maybe this is different whether you're working as a team or working by yourself, but how do you get a new idea out of your brain and into the glass?
I play, I experiment. I don't like to draw, I don't like to write, I don't like picking up pencils very much. So if I have an idea, I go to the torch, I go to the studio, and I try and experiment. If I feel frustrated or blocked, then maybe I'll go onto YouTube and look for videos that might help me get through that, or I'll ask a friend for some advice. But in general, I'm a very hands-on, experiment with things kind of guy.
Do you ever struggle with putting your work out there at all? Maybe other people's thoughts about your work?
Oh, it's the worst thing. it's an there are many reasons why inspiration is something I've been struggling with, and knowing that I have to sell it is a real bummer. Like taking pictures, I mean, I could make a marble sometimes, and trying to get good photos of that marble, it almost doubles the time that I put into it.
And then wait, the second part of this terrible, terrible situation is how do you price it?
Oh, God. I try to base my pricing based off of what I see other people pricing work at. I find and I have to be realistic that I'm not Salt, I'm not, you know, I'm not Krunkelstein. I'm not like somebody who is super famous and has some super huge name. So I try to price it in a realistic spectrum based on the work that I see people who don't have huge names are selling their work at. And I do some math, you know, like how long do these take me to make? How much materials went into them? And what would a good wholesale value be to support a fair wage? And as Lewis Wilson told me early on, if you're not making $60 an hour at the torch, you're not making $20 an hour in your business. That if you're making $1 a minute at the torch, you're probably making $20 an hour after your expenses, after your other input of time. And that's if you're doing things well. That's if you're managing your other expenses well.
That's a good benchmark. So, are anxiety or depression any part of your life? Because they're major parts of both of our lives. So, it's a question we like to ask everyone.
Man, I am surrounded by depression. My brother lives on my property. He's usually pretty depressed or angry. My mom lives on the property. She's been manic depressive my whole life. And I'm a pretty upbeat person. And it gets me sometimes. It really, like, feeling, especially with COVID and the lockdown, and like, I'm still socially distant. I'm still kind of looking out for mom. And there are times that I go into the studio and tears just flow. And music triggers it sometimes, where I'll be playing some music that I really love and kind of miss going to shows, and then next thing you know, a few tears flow, and then next thing you know, I'm just remembering all the depression that I've experienced through the people around me. And it kind of overwhelms me at times. Getting into the studio actually helps. I feel like that when I have those days, it kind of it's a release, and that I end up feeling quite a bit better afterwards. Those are actually some of my more productive days. Anxiety, yes and no. I don't think I get anxiety the way that people who talk about anxiety get anxiety. I feel a little anxious right now. I felt a little anxious about doing this. I've never considered medicating my feelings of anxiousness, or, well, I guess I probably do. I smoke a lot of pot. I smoke a lot of weed, so maybe that's why I don't feel so anxious all the time.
So those are kind of like all my questions, but we wanted to learn about you. So I don't want to ignore the fact that you're such a cool person to learn about. But also one of the reasons why we reached out to you is that we have a few people that are connected to Lucky, and it just all came together in that way. So I was wondering if you had anything else that you wanted to share about Lucky at the end that we can pass off, just because it seems like he was such a cool person, and just any knowledge to pass from him.
Lucky was a good and crazy guy. I met Lucky when we were going to trade school, and he was a runaway, he was literally on the run from the law, an ex-carny from Alaska whose fingers were kind of short because he had had frostbite when he was young. And as a carny, he told me that what happened, how he got busted as a carny, was he was doing one of those things where the person throws a ball to knock the bottles over in Texas, and some guy came up and threw a $50 bill down and said, "I bet you $50 I can knock all those down with one throw." And Lucky took the money and said, "You got it." And the guy was a cop and busted him for gambling in Texas. And so he went on the run and ended up in electronics trade school with me. It was ABC Tech. Get to be what you want to be at ABC, which was also right next to and affiliated with Pedigree Tech, which was a dog grooming place. And we kind of hit it off. We both were, there were 3 of us in the class who were the top 3 students in our group, and Lucky and I were probably a little bit we did a lot of acid. We would literally go to class high on acid, and we were top students there. We were doing really well, and we bonded a lot. We ended up moving right next door to each other and barbecuing and just spending a lot of time together, and he was like a brother to me. We went to our first Dead shows together. That was something that changed the direction of both of our lives. He went to partner with this guy who made fake food for a while before he went on tour. So in Tucson, he met this guy who was making fake food for, he would make fake kale that goes into salad bars or, around the edges of the salad bar. One of their biggest customers was a freezer company that would fill freezers with fake food for trade shows. Just crazy things. And he was able to convince a supplier to provide them with nitrous oxide because he said it was part of their process. So he was, had a big tank of nitrous at the office. He was a wild and crazy man, but he was also a person who had a heart of gold and would take his shirt off to hand it to somebody if they were cold. He was somebody who I loved dearly and had a lot of respect for. He changed the direction of my life when he showed up. I was floundering. I had been doing the ceramics for 13 years and was really tired of people telling me I should do it out of glass. Was really struggling to sell the product at that time as well because the stores used to have so much stuff. And so Lucky came along and gave me the gift of learning how to fish all over again. And that was something else that Lucky was happy to do, was to teach people how to fish.
Thanks so much for sharing.
Yeah, he sounds like a really special person.
He is.
Well, thank you so much for all your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Connected in Glass. Make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram for more information on the artists we interview and for updates on the podcast.